Roy just listened to a recording. The body temperature in his head rose to 40 degrees. This is the world of the future. A horrific virus that is transmitted by sound. Anyone who hears an infected person speak, they'll be infected. Then they become confused and talk nonsense, eventually dying of brain failure. Because there is no vaccine or cure, so everyone has to wear headphones when they go out. And he can't talk. Roy is the only person in the world who is immune to the virus. To hide himself, he lived in secret at his mother's house, incognito. One day his mother asked him to help her buy soap. In the supermarket, an old lady with no headphones looked around and quietly approached. When he took off his headphones, suddenly started talking nonsense to her. The people around her noticed that something was wrong and ran away. The supermarket workers spotted the infected man and lowered the security door. Everyone got out, only Roy and a little boy. They were locked in. The old lady started to chase Roy and talk to him. The old lady found that it was not working, so she turned her mark to the little boy next to her. Roy gave the boy his headphones. Then he sent the boy out first, although he was immune to the virus, but he was still suffering from the infection. There was no way out of the door. Roy had to break glass. He escaped through the window. He stumbled along the way. The first symptoms of the infection had set in. Back at home, he can barely walk. When he felt a man appear beside him, talking in his ear, irritated, he shouted, "Shut up!" The epidemic prevention officers arrived at the supermarket. The old lady was taken away. But during the investigation, the commander received a report. A man had been infected and left through the back window. The commander realized the situation was not good. The commander looked through the surveillance. He was pretty sure that the man was infected. But because the video was so blurry, the man's appearance was only approximate. They could only follow where the man had disappeared. But it was this blurred outline. It reminded the commander of a case from long ago. Project X. A team was working on this virus. They were the first to come up with the idea of classifying the virus and the news that children were not immune to the virus. They were said to be on the verge of developing a vaccine. But strangely enough, this team of 4 was caught in a fire. 3 people were killed. Only one linguist is unaccounted for. And the photograph he left behind in the archives, he looks exactly like Roy. At this point, Roy arrives at a relative's house. The husband of the family had been infected with the virus, but still hadn't said a word for years. So the virus hadn't spread. But when he saw Roy, the man suddenly started shouting. The commotion attracted the young son of a relative. The youngest son asked Roy to cure his father. But Roy said when he contracted the virus, it was his good brother Tom who gave him the sacred seal of the skull. That gave him immunity to the virus. But now Tom had died in that fire. There was no way out. The youngest son said that Tom hadn't died at all. Roy didn't believe him. But on the way back, the younger son gave him a packet of pills and a photograph. The picture on the pills, they were identical to the tattoo on Tom's arm. And these pills came from an infected person. This leads Roy to wonder if there was something strange about his friend's death. On the other side, the commander had identified him through surveillance and got his medical records. It showed that Roy had been to the rehab center 14 times in a row. Strangely enough, each time the illness was a high head fever. This struck the commander as impossible. The commander hurriedly started using the thermal imaging camera, reviewing the surveillance. It was discovered that when Roy was attacked by the infected, his head temperature rose sharply. Then he left again as if nothing had happened. And based on the headset number he gave to the little boy, the commander finally found out Roy's true identity. It was the one he'd been looking for. The missing linguist from Project X. He was also certain that Roy was immune to the virus. So he immediately told his commanding officer about the important news. But the officer didn't believe that the Project X member was still alive and decided that there was something wrong with the commander's brain. Unbeknownst to him, by now Roy had infiltrated the building under a different identity. And the purpose of this visit to check if his brother Tom was still alive. He found out about Tom through the internal network, looking at his autopsy photos by the tattoo on his arm. Roy decided that this man was not Tom. Then he subconsciously checked his own file only to find a video of himself in a supermarket. He tried to delete it, but he couldn't delete it. Everything meant that his identity had been discovered. At the same time, the commander had also led a large group of people into Roy's mother's house. Found out she was at home. He was going to wait for him. And Roy's mother took the opportunity, hanging the red amulet of danger on the window. And Roy, having learned that he had been exposed, has lost his usual calm. He wants to go home and take his mother away. He comes to the door and finds a red amulet in the window. He immediately guessed that someone was home. He wanted to turn himself in. Suddenly, he remembered the girl at the bus stop. A phrase repeats itself in his mind. So he made up his mind and started talking deliberately.